Welcome to AP Biology. This video is on the cytoskeleton. The major function of the cytoskeleton within the cell is going to be organization. It is responsible for organizing cell structure and for organizing activities within the cell. The cytoskeleton is made up of a network of fibers. There are three different types of fibers that compose the cytoskeleton. The largest fiber is called the microtubule. The fiber of intermediate size is called the intermediate filament. The smallest fiber making up the cytoskeleton is called the microfilament. The microfilaments are the thinnest fibers, and they are also called actin filaments. Microfilament and actin are going to be used interchangeably. The cytoskeleton is going to help to support the cell and maintain its shape. The cytoskeleton is also going to provide for movement within the cell. Movement within the cell takes place through the use of motor proteins. These motor proteins are going to use a member of the cytoskeleton like a monorail. Here we see a picture of a motor protein causing movement within the cell. Motor proteins are going to move along microtubules, the largest fibers making up the cytoskeleton. You can see that the microtubule is a hollow tube, and in this case we're going to see a vesicle move from one part of the cell to another part. So it might be moving from the rough endoplasmic reticulum over to the Golgi apparatus. Here you see the motor protein. It kind of looks like a waist and two legs, and this motor protein is literally going to walk the transport vesicle down the microtubule like a monorail. To power the motor protein, the cell is going to utilize ATP. Here we see an electron microscope picture of vesicles moving along the microtubule using these motor proteins. All movement that takes place within the cell is going to take place through the use of motor proteins. Here we see a comparison of the structure of the different members of the cytoskeleton. You can see that the microtubule is the largest, it's the thickest. It's made up of small proteins called tubulin proteins, which are small globular proteins. And you see that they kind of get spiraled around to create this tube-like structure. Here we see the intermediate filaments, which are made up of keratin proteins. You find keratin throughout an organism. You find keratin within the hair, within the nails. It's a major structural protein within the body. These intermediate filaments are going to form the nuclear lamina. The filaments, or I should say the intermediate filaments, that give the nuclear envelope its shape. Finally, here you see the microfilaments or actin filaments, and they are made up of actin subunits. And we're going to see that actin is specialized for contraction. It's going to be used to generate movement of the cell or within the cell. The centrosome is considered the microtubule organizing center within the cell. It is the location by which microtubules are going to form. Within the centrosome we see a pair of centrioles, and each centriole contains 9 triplets of microtubules. So here you see the centrosome, which is the microtubule organizing center. Here we see both centrioles, and these centrioles are made up of many microtubules, 9 triplets to be exact. We're going to see later on that these centrioles are used during cell division. The centrioles produce the microtubules. The microtubules are going to extend within the cell and are going to be used for the movement of chromosomes during the process of mitosis. Cilia and Flagella are also composed of microtubules, and they're going to be used for movement. Cilia are hair-like structures on the outside of a cell. They're used for movement outside of the cell. For example, all of the cells that make up our windpipe contain cilia, and the cilia move mucus and debris out of the lungs and out of our bodies. The flagella is a tail-like structure that's used for locomotion. For example, the flagella causes movement of the sperm. Both cilia and flagella move through the use of microtubules and motor proteins. The motor proteins responsible for creating movement of the cilia and the flagella are called dynein proteins, and the microtubules of a cilia or flagella are sheathed by a piece of plasma membrane. So they have a piece of membrane covering the microtubules. The cilia or flagella gets anchored to the cell using a basal body. Let's look at how the microtubules and motor proteins cause movement of cilia and flagella. Here you see a microscope picture of a sperm, and the sperm has the long flagella. Here you see the movement of the cilia on the outside of a cell. So how do they actually generate movement? Here you see a cross-section of a flagella or a cilia, and you see here that we see a ring of microtubules right here, and in between those microtubules we see the dynein proteins. Sheathing the entire cilia or flagella is going to be the plasma membrane. Let's see how the dynein proteins actually produce the movement. So here you see two microtubules, and here you see the dynein motor proteins and their little eggs. We're going to see why it's so important that the microtubules are anchored to the cell using the basal body like you see right here. If the microtubules were not anchored to the cell, as the feet of the motor proteins walked, the one set of microtubules would simply be pushed upward. This would not produce any movement. It wouldn't produce the characteristic movement of cilia and flagella back and forth like you see right here. Since the microtubules are anchored to the cell, when the dynein motor proteins walk, instead of the microtubule being forced upward, it's going to cause the microtubule to bend. So the dynein motor proteins walking along a structure that is fixed to the cell is going to be able to create this characteristic movement of a cilia or flagella back and forth. Of course, like anything else, these motor proteins are going to be fueled using ATP. Microfilaments are also called actin filaments. They're going to perform many functions within the cell. They're found directly underneath the cell membrane. Here you see them, and they form a structure called the cortex. The cortex gives the cell its shape. Actin microfilaments are also used for movement in the cell and of the cell. One thing that they're used for is muscle contraction. Within a muscle cell, actin microfilaments interact with another protein called myosin. Here you see the myosin right here. And actin and myosin interact with one another in order to create muscle contraction. We'll see later on exactly how this takes place. Actin is also found within a protist called the amoeba, and it causes movement of the amoeba by creating these structures called pseudopodia. The pseudopodia are lined with the actin microfilaments, and these are able to extend outward and contract inward using the movement of the actin. Finally, actin microfilaments perform a process within plant cells called cytoplasmic streaming. The actin microfilaments contracting causes the movement of the cytosol within the plant cell, and it helps to circulate it around, and that's going to increase the movement of nutrients and whatnot throughout the plant cell. This concludes our video.